Welcome back. For a change of pace here on AIM Agenda, we're going to take a look at what's been happening in Brazil, in particular these fires that caught global attention. Joining us now, a senior lecturer of Latin American Studies at the University of Melbourne, Jeff Garmany. Jeff, thank you for your time. Now, these fires, while they have gained global attention, they've also highlighted some very specific issues to Brazil and corruption in managing the Amazon.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on the program. I think there's a few things to keep in mind with respect to these fires, and one of them is we're having a hard time actually making sense and understanding what's happening on the ground here. I think two key issues to keep in mind when we consider questions of environmental degradation in Brazil, or for that matter anywhere in Latin America. We need to consider questions of poverty and of inequality. This is something that people have to keep in mind. And another question involves sort of political pressure and political lobby groups. In the case of the Amazon right now, certainly, and even something that Brazil's environmental minister, Ricardo Salles, would agree with, poverty is a major issue here. And when people are confronted with poverty, they're more likely to burn down the forest in order to feed their families, right? But there's different ways to address this sort of poverty. And arguably what Brazil's environmental minister, and in fact the Bolsonaro government, has encouraged is a broader sort of a policy of what we might kind of call trickle-down economics, where the idea is to just create more wealth, and this will help the poor people, right? This money will begin to trickle down to the poor farmers. On the other side of this, though, one could say actually the bigger issue here isn't necessarily a lack of resources. It's actually the problem of inequality that Brazil faces. Inequality is Brazil's major issue here. And so rather than sort of reappropriating some of these resources or redistributing some of these resources, Brazil's government is currently in the process of just trying to sort of create more and more and more, which of course actually leads to higher levels of deforestation in the Amazon. And this is, in a certain sense, what's sort of driving this push to create more agricultural land near to the Amazon forest.
One of the really fascinating things we saw come out of this fire was global attention. We saw so many celebrities getting on and tweeting about fire in the Amazon, that it was the lungs of the earth that were burning, and it was that issue that they were saying was a global issue. But this does very much speak to local policies and the issues that are facing the Amazon in particular, but Brazil as well. And it also came up during the G7 conference in the north of France when Bolsonaro was offered funding by the G7 leaders, about $10 million. So, Jeff Garmany, I'll ask you just that $10 million that was originally offered by the G7 leaders to Bolsonaro, he didn't take that very well.
Well, you know, on the one hand here, and to be fair, there are real issues of national sovereignty here. Most countries don't really like other countries coming in and telling them how to manage their affairs, or certainly telling them how to manage their national territory. And this has been a sensitive issue, not just in Brazil, in a lot of countries that are former colonies, for example, like in Latin America. And so this is why Bolsonaro is sort of able to harness this discourse of this is a new case of colonization, and these European powers should take this money and go reforest their own countries because they cut down their own forests, which to a certain extent is sort of true. The catch is that this is a bit more of just sort of a populist discourse in Brazil to try and argue, well, what we really need here, we need to make sure that nobody comes in and uses the Amazon forest because this is a resource for us. And this actually ties back, there's a long legacy of this that goes back several decades, most famously to the military dictatorship in Brazil in the 1970s, whereby there was this policy of we need to use this land or we're going to lose this land, right? This is a resource, and if we don't make use of this, foreign countries will come in and take it away from us. And so this is actually what Bolsonaro is playing into, and unfortunately, while we can understand there's real issues of sort of national sovereignty at stake here, it's not helpful. It's not helpful to to the planet and the protection of resources like the Amazon, but it's also not very helpful to the people who live in the Amazon and who are under threat from these fires, and who are also under threat from mining interests and agricultural interests in that area also.
How legitimate do you think these concerns are that local landowners and cattle ranchers were deliberately lighting fires in the Amazon to destroy the land?
I think it's very credible. I mean, we have to remember that in the very first instance here, the institute that is in charge of maintaining Brazil's environmental resources, it's called IBAMA in Brazil, has been undermined by the Bolsonaro government. They've seen their funding cut by 25% since he took office. And they were already under-facilitated and under-resourced. And with even fewer resources, they're less able to actually patrol and control this area. And so what this means is that there's a tremendous amount of land and forest here that's not very highly regulated. It's not that there's no laws. There's plenty of laws, and as a matter of fact, they're very strict laws. There's just not very good enforcement of these laws. So what this enables people to do, for example, is to burn away some of this forest in what we would call kind of a classic land grab strategy, whereby then they can begin to plant crops on it and make it their own, frankly, because there's no one there to tell them otherwise.
Given that level of corruption, it's not hard to think that there might be similar implications for this oil spill that's been happening, and that Bolsonaro also says could be criminal, potentially a bit hypocritical.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I would say certainly this oil spill is criminal. I don't know who's behind it. So far as I know, we don't know at all. The Bolsonaro government has recently tried to blame Venezuela for this. I don't actually know where this evidence would come from. If indeed there is evidence that Venezuela is behind this, we need to see this evidence. Again, to a certain extent, I would agree, yes, this is absolutely a criminal act here. But I think, again, it highlights some of the problems at work here when you begin to undermine and cut funding to the institution that actually works to protect the environment. You shouldn't be surprised when instances like this happen and you're unable to uncover who is actually behind these instances of environmental degradation. If you cut the resources to the institute that protects the environment, you shouldn't be surprised then when the environment faces the consequences for it.
And that's the issue, isn't it? You've got the Brazilian government obviously not wanting to take much lead from foreign powers, but there are global implications to things like the Amazon fires and these oil spills.
Oh, yes. No, there absolutely are. And to be honest, I think this is sort of the back and forth that Brazil is facing right now. I think certainly there are plenty of people. In fact, I would say a majority of Brazilians are actually in favor of protecting the environment. The way that Bolsonaro has responded to these fires in the Amazon has made him deeply unpopular in Brazil. Most Brazilians are concerned about this, and not just because they see the Amazon as an economic resource. They actually do. They absolutely see it connected in sort of the broader global ecosystem and as a resource that's important for the planet here. So Bolsonaro, to a certain extent, has really isolated himself, even among his sort of political supporters here, who understand that it's very important for Brazil to be connected with other global powers, to collaborate with other global powers, and that this is important, not just for sort of Brazil economically, but also for Brazil's broader geopolitical goals.
Jeff Carmody, thank you so much for your time and your insight into what's happening in Brazil.
Thank you so much.